10 things that you should know before hosting your first or next in-person event. Now, to be completely honest with you, back when I started hosting events at Fun Launch is a high-ticket coaching and community-oriented business. I couldn't find any content online about how to host events for coaching or community-oriented businesses. There was a lot of general event planning content out there, like how to plan your first wedding or how to plan your first conference or your first workshop, but none of them were from the perspective and the paradigm of hosting in-person events for coaching and community businesses. And since then, we figured it out. We've been doing events for about 5 years now. I eventually ended up leaving Fun Launch and starting Bullish Events with Ethan, my co-founder. And now we partner with other coaches and community owners to help them host their own in-person events. So we figured it out. That being said, I'm making this video for Andy 5 years ago, who had no idea what he was doing and didn't have anywhere to go to learn how to host a good, transformational, and profitable event for a coaching or community business. All right, with all that being said, let's jump right into it. So I'm actually trying out Figma for the first time for YouTube videos, so we'll see how it goes. I like these little sticky notes. Number one is be fluid. So one thing that I used to think about managing and creating and designing events, and one thing I hear from a lot of people that are also in the game, is that they think that they need to be rigid. Like, okay, I built this itinerary, I built this run of show, and every single thing has to happen. Every single box needs to be checked. But what we have discovered is that it's good to be fluid. It's good to read the room, read the energy, and make sure that the experience is unfolding and that you're meeting the people where they are. Because one of the worst things that you can do when hosting an event is to read the room and see that energy is low, or people aren't very engaged in a topic, or that somebody just asked a question and it sparked this whole conversation, this rabbit hole that a lot of people want to go down, but you transition because it's for the sake of the itinerary, the sake of the run of show. And going back to the low energy example, people are tired and exhausted and they're just not very engaged, but you continue with an activity just because it's on the itinerary. That is a great way to decrease the experience of your event for both you and your attendee. So it's very important to be fluid, to read the room, read the energy. And actually on this sticky note, I wrote itinerary equals a container, and that's exactly right. Your itinerary, it's a guide. You do want to have a current situation, a desired outcome. You want to have a transformation and a story that is happening at your event. You don't want it just to be random and happening with absolutely no structure, but you want that itinerary to be a container where there's steps, there's checkpoints that you want to get to your desired outcome, to get your attendees to their desired outcome. That being said, the space in between those checkpoints can kind of unfold in any way you want. So it's okay to be dynamic. It's okay to call audibles. In fact, some of our most successful events were the ones where we called the most audibles, where me and my business partner, Ethan, we're in the back of the room, we're reading the room, we're seeing how attendees are reacting to content, we're seeing how they're engaging with each other during breakouts, and we make changes. We say, okay, people are not really enjoying this. We need to kind of scrap this next activity and go straight into another breakout to get people talking with each other. Or maybe someone really enjoyed this conversation and they're asking a bunch of questions and it's causing other people in the room to ask questions, and we see that this is a pain point that most people are experiencing, and we should scrap the next session so that this Q&A or this discussion can run long. Whatever it is, we're always calling audibles and making changes from behind the scenes, and that's okay for you to do with your events as well. I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone has a game plan until they get punched in the face, and that's kind of the case with events as well. You have this idea of how it's supposed to run, but everything changes when you get in the room. So instead of being super rigid, make sure that you're fluid, make sure that you're reading the room, reading the energy levels of your attendees, and it's okay to call audibles and make changes during your event. So that's number one, be fluid. Number two is manage expectations. And I wrote right here, exceed or meet and never miss. This is very important. I'm actually going to tell you guys a story as to why this is so important that kind of reinforces this point. So this goes back to one of the Fun Launch live events that we did at Fun Launch. And this one took place in Orlando. It was the last one we did. It was right around 1,700 attendees. And we had a brunch for the VIP members on the last day of the event, or maybe it was day 2. I can't really remember, but there was a brunch somewhere during the event for VIP ticket holders. And it's important to understand what the collective audience that you're serving will think of something. So for me, when I think of brunch, I'm a big acai bowl fan. I like yogurt. I like, granola. I'm not a big waffle and fried chicken and bacon type guy. So we put brunch on the itinerary, but the brunch was acai bowls. It was yogurt. It was more light, kind of healthier meal, you could say, because that's one thing that's important to manage at events is you want to manage energy level. So if you just give your attendees a bunch of waffles and a bunch of sugar and a bunch of bacon, and it's going to slow them down. But we said brunch, and people were expecting a traditional brunch, and what they got wasn't a traditional brunch. And this was actually one of my biggest failures as an event designer. People were very upset. They were disappointed. They were underwhelmed, and expectations were not met. And if I would have used any other word except for brunch, it would have worked out. But because I used brunch, people were expecting pancakes. They were expecting waffles. They were expecting a very hearty brunch, but I gave them a lighter, healthier brunch option, which a lot of people were not happy with. So that was a mismanagement of expectations. And it's important for you when you're hosting events to always meet and manage expectations. And an easy way to determine this is like, if you're going to make a promise, just keep it. Like if you're going to say that your event is going to deliver on something, or if it's going to do something, or they're going to get something, make sure you deliver on that promise. And also try not to make promises before you know you can fulfill on them, because one of the worst things you can do is promise something at your event and then realize that it's not possible to fulfill on, and then that leads to people missing their expectations. They're being under-delivered on, which just causes disappointment. And one thing you'll see throughout this whole list is this stuff is very important when it comes to monetizing your event as well. If you're presenting an offer at your event, you could have the best offer ever, the best presentation. You could have your entire sales process completely dialed in. But if expectations are not being met for the attendees throughout the event, that's going to hurt your conversion. So it's very important to focus a lot of attention on the experience of the event if you want your event to be properly monetized and actually see a healthy return on investment. Okay, that's number 2, managing expectations. Number 3 is caffeine, and this one's hilarious. I have some PTSD flashbacks to events where we didn't give caffeine to all the attendees and they were just so upset, which makes sense. Caffeine, you could argue that it's an addiction, more of an enjoyment. I don't know which side of the coin you fall on. I'm a coffee drinker. I appreciate caffeine, and it's one of those cases where if you can't beat them, you got to join them. So you don't have to always give caffeine to your attendees. You don't have, if you're going to host a large event or even a smaller event, depending on your budget, like you don't always have to give your attendees caffeine and coffee and whatever it is, but you just want to make sure there's a plan in place for people to get their coffee. So if you're not going to be giving your attendees coffee at your event, make sure you bake in some time into your itinerary for them to go and get coffee. Or before the event, when you're communicating with your attendees and giving them all the pre-event information, list out a few nearby coffee shops they can go to before the event and during lunch. Maybe it's just important to have a caffeine plan in place for your attendees, because you can't really change the fact that most people are very addicted to coffee and need their caffeine in order to function throughout the day. So if you can't beat them, join them. And I've had a few clients that have kind of pushed back on this, and they're like, well, I don't want to feed into their habit. Like if they're drinking coffee, that's their own problem and they should figure out. There might be a point there, but the reality is if you do not give your attendees caffeine, they're going to be going through withdrawals during your event, which is going to impact the experience they have. It's going to impact the survey results you get. It's going to impact your monetization, your upsells, whatever it is that's happening at your event. It's going to be negatively impacted by people going through caffeine withdrawals in your room. So just don't do that. Don't try to justify why you shouldn't provide caffeine for your attendees. But I promise you, I have been down that road before. It's not worth it. If you can't beat them, join them. Give your attendees caffeine. All right, number 4. Revenue model and monetization strategy. So this is just me pointing out that it's important to have this in place before you go into your event. And I know it sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people just host events and hope that it's properly monetized. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to invest in the experience, and if the money comes back, that's fine. But I just view it as a sunk cost. And we at Bullish Events do not view events as a sunk. We view them as a growth engine. And this is exactly how it was at Fun Launch as well. There's a case study on this channel about how we were able to generate over $10 million in revenue from in-person events at Fun Launch. And that's because we treated events as a vehicle for growth, as a growth engine. And that was just $10 million in direct revenue. That doesn't count all the indirect monetization vehicles like increasing lifetime value, generating marketing assets, testimonials, social proof authority. There's so much indirect revenue that's generated from in-person events. But it's important to be intentional about that and actually have a revenue model built out for your event. So whether you're looking to monetize through ticket sales and sponsorships, or through ticket sales and event upsells, or you're looking to just purely monetize through the increase of lifetime value and the investment in your authority and your social proof and your trust, that's more of an indirect monetization avenue, but it's completely valid. And we have a few clients that we work with that use that strategy. Whatever you are doing, however you want to monetize your in-person events, just make sure you have a revenue model and a monetization strategy built out. Number 5, you want to deeply understand your avatar. And this should be pretty intuitive, but for me, it wasn't in the beginning, and maybe it's not for you. It's important to understand who's in the room at your event. That way you can design the experience for them. It's very easy for people to, one, just fill their event with anybody that will show up, and also to just design an event based on what they want to see and what they think is interesting and what pain points they have, which that's not the case. Like, you as the event host are not the one that's in the room. You're not in the seats. You're not the one that's spending your money to go and attend this event. So make sure that you understand your avatar, who's going to be in the room, and use that to build out a transformational experience for them. And this is also important on the front end and the back end for your event. So on the front end, the messaging of your event is really important. It's very, very important for you to convey who the event is for and also who the event is not for, because you don't want your event just filled with anybody. You want your event filled with high quality attendees that are pre-vetted and they are meant to be in that room. You don't want it just to be filled with anyone, because that will impact your return on investment. It'll impact your experience as the event host, and it will impact the experience of the attendees. So it's important to understand your avatar on the front end for marketing, but it's also important to understand on the back end for designing the experience. And one way to understand your avatar and to just really, really gain a crystal clear picture of who's in the room and what their pain points are and what they're looking to get out of the event is just to simply talk to them. We just did an event for a client where people were investing around $5,000 to be in the room, and we wanted to take the experience very seriously, and we wanted to make sure that we understood every single thing that there is to know about the attendees. So we jumped on an onboarding call, a 45-minute onboarding call with every single attendee, just to download as much information as possible. And that allowed us to design an experience that was built specifically for every single attendee that was in the room. We knew what their pain points were. We knew where they were in their stages of growth. We knew their revenue. We knew their offer. We knew exactly what they wanted to get out of the event, who they were looking to meet. And all of this data allowed us to build an amazing experience for them. So if you are hosting an in-person event, make sure that you deeply understand your avatar. Number 6, music. This is very fast. I'll just touch on this briefly, but music will make or break your event. If you don't have any music at your event, you'll have awkwardness, you'll have tension, and the energy throughout the room just will not be flowing. But that being said, on the other side of things, if you do have music, people will feel welcomed, people will feel energized. There won't be as much awkwardness, there won't be as much tension, and you can actually leverage music, and you can also leverage different types of music at different parts of the event. So for example, at the beginning, what we typically do is we play music that is welcoming. It makes people feel excited, it makes them feel energized, it makes them feel like they're about to go into this big party or this big experience. It kind of builds this anticipation. So we use music in that way at the beginning. And then throughout the event, when people are doing reflections or they're doing group work or they are doing an assignment and they're actually like diving into the weeds of their business, whatever it is, we use focused oriented music. So like lo-fi beats and music that is typically designed to get creative juices flowing. Then at the end of the event, we play music that makes people feel connected, they feel excited, they feel accomplished, and they're ready to go and implement everything into the real world. So music is non-negotiable for in-person events. Make sure you have a plan for your music. It will make or break your event. All right, moving on to number 7. You want to facilitate connection and networking at your event. So one thing a lot of event hosts get wrong, and we actually got this wrong as well for many years before we realized that this was negatively impacting our experiences, and that is we would put all of the pressure on the attendees to do the networking and make the connections. We're like, yeah, you know what? They're in this room. They can all figure it out. But the reality is that only caters to extroverts, to people that are thriving and are willing and excited to go out and talk to strangers and spark up conversations and go and introduce themselves, which is not a very large percentage of the room. It could be anywhere from 25 to 50% of the room, which leaves 50 to 75% of the room struggling to go and make connections and meet people at the event. So what you want to do as the event host is you want to facilitate these connections and you want to facilitate the networking. Number 8 is getting feedback. If you're hosting events for your coaching business or your community, it's important to want to always be improving your events. And the best way to do that is by gathering feedback and data. So this is usually done in the form of a survey. And when you do a survey, you don't want it to be something that you send out after the event or something that people fill out as they're leaving the event. You want it to happen during the event. Like, you want a designated time during the event where people are filling out the survey, giving their feedback, and making sure that almost everyone in the room is taking part. And you want to do this when like 95 to 99% of the value of the event has been delivered. There was actually a survey that we did one time that happened before the peak of the event, before the peak experience. This event was actually taking place in Hawaii, I believe it was. And at the end of the event, we had like this beach dinner during sunset, and it was actually like a peak core experience. Like, I think back to that as like one of the coolest things I've ever done. And a lot of the attendees at the event said like, this is a core memory that I'll remember for the rest of my life. But we did the survey before that, and the survey results were still good. Like, people still enjoyed the event, but they would have been so much better if the survey took place after that beach dinner. So make sure you're positioning your survey at a point in the event where it's still still a part of the event and people are engaged and they're going to do it, but also positioned after most of the value has been delivered. And one thing too, you want to make sure you're gathering quantitative and qualitative data from these surveys. So make sure you're grabbing a numerical piece of data that you can measure. So whether it's an attendee satisfaction score, a net promoter score, a mixture of both, make sure you're grabbing a number that you can measure and compare to other events, as well as getting some other qualitative data that allows attendees to voice their opinions on the event. So number 8, make sure you're getting feedback. Number 9, make sure that you aren't over teaching. This is something that is changing in the events industry. For so long, an event, a good event was viewed as something where, you had 5, 10, 15 keynote speakers and everybody was giving their presentations and it was very high level and surface level. And then they would throw up a QR code at the end where you could get their free book or go sign up for a different program. And then in reality, to get the real value of the event, to get the implementation, to actually get results, you had to go into some sort of upsell. This worked for a while, but it's not really working anymore. People aren't really attending events to learn about things. They're attending events to learn a few things, but then to implement and move the needle forward at the experience itself. And a framework that we actually follow at our events for teaching, or for, I guess you could say, delivering content, is framework, reflection, audit, small groups, large groups. So this starts off at frame, which is framing the session, framing the activity. It's important that people go into something with a proper frame so that they are engaged and that they are enrolled in the experience. And then there's a framework. So this is the actual teaching part. And this is only 10 to 20 minutes, maybe sometimes 30 minutes, but a very small part of the whole experience. And then there's a personal reflection and audit. So people think and they do something, they reflect on what they just learned. They start to fill something out. They start to work on a deliverable, whatever it is. And then you go into small groups. So this is where people discuss their reflections and their audits in a group of 2, 3, 4 individuals. And then at the end, it's a large group share. So people actually speak out and talk to the entire group. And this is where you can really start to tap into collective intelligence and really get the energy flowing throughout the entire group of people that are there. And then I actually forgot one thing here. This should lead into a deliverable. So we typically engineer each one of our sessions to have a deliverable. They get something out of it. There's a thing that they have worked on, that they have discussed with the small groups, that they shared with the large groups, and now they have a deliverable. So they're not learning just for the sake of learning, and they're not walking away with anything tangible. Every single session is designed to have a frame, to have a framework, to have a reflection audit, a small group discussion, a large group discussion, and a deliverable that they can walk away with and actually implement into their business. So that's just a framework that we use at our events for delivering content. All right, and this brings me to point number 10, the 10th thing that you should know before hosting your first or next in-person event. And that is just don't try and do it all by yourself. Because the reality is events require a lot of time, energy, attention, resources in order for them to properly work and then for them to be a good experience for your attendees, for them to be profitable, and for them to actually be a growth engine, a vehicle of growth inside of your business. And what we see a lot of coaches and community owners do, a lot of founders, is we see them trying to do everything by themselves. They're trying to grow their business, they're trying to manage their teams, they're trying to make their business work, and they're also trying to make their events work. And it's just very split focus, it's very split attention. So what I would recommend that you do is you find a partner, somebody to work with that's going to focus purely on your events while you can continue to focus on growing your business. And then you can just show up and enjoy the experience. Because if you do try to do everything by yourself, either your business is going to suffer, your events are going to suffer, or your mental health and your well-being is going to suffer, and that's just not worth it. Events are powerful, and I think events are going to be non-negotiable for coaching and community-oriented businesses as we get further into this AI-fied world that we're living in, this digital world that we're living in. But that doesn't mean that you have to be the one that does everything. You can go find somebody to help you with your events so that you can keep your energy and your attention on your business while somebody else takes care of your events. I'll actually give you a glimpse into the 2 types of clients that we typically work with. The first type of client is a coach or community owner that hasn't done an event before. They don't really want to be the ones that have to figure it out. They don't want to go through the trial and error of learning what works and what doesn't work, and they don't want to invest all the time and energy into the event, so they come and they hire us to do it. Or the second type of client we work with is a coach or community owner that has hosted events before, but they know how hard it is. It didn't really perform, it didn't really work very well, or it did okay, but they sacrificed their mental health and their well-being to make it happen. And they always tell us that they see the power of in-person events and they want to keep doing in-person events, but they never want to do it again themselves. Those Those are typically the two types of clients we work with. So if you're going to be hosting in-person events for your coaching business or your community, I would recommend not trying to do it all by yourself. And that wraps up the 10 things that you should know before hosting your first or next in-person event, or in other words, 10 things I wish I knew before hosting my first in-person event. If you own your own coaching business or your own community and you are looking to host in-person events, or maybe you have started hosting your own in-person events and you're looking for somebody to take ownership over them so that you can keep focusing your time, energy, and attention on your business, click the link down in the description. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Also, if you found this video valuable, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.